Good morning. I will call to order this regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is February 19th, 2015. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee and joined by committee members, Council Members Reich, Goodman, Johnson, Council President Johnson. Councilmember Warsame is absent today on city business in Washington, D.C. We have 7 items on today's agenda. We'll start with our public hearing, which is appointments to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and I think we have at least one ZBA member here. This is to confirm council appointments for three 3-year terms that would end in 2017 for Anja Drescher, who is in Ward 2, Matt Perry, which is a reappointment from Ward 13, and Jacob Softly, who is a reappointment from the 10th Ward. I'd like to invite anyone, so I'll open the public hearing and would invite any of the appointees to come up if they'd like to speak.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Anja Drescher, and I'm open to any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Councilmember Goodman.
Madam Chair, thank you. Since there's no supporting information in our packet, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about herself and her interest in serving. In the future, I would love to have more detailed information about the new nominees, not the people, we know the people who have already served, but maybe the new people being appointed, we could just get to know them a little bit better.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Why do I have such a strong interest actually in the board a position? Coming from a personal and from an emotional standpoint perspective, I truly love Minneapolis. I moved here 9 years ago, and I from Chicago, and I lived all over the world, and Minneapolis became a really true, strong home base. I volunteered in 7 different organizations while I was here, so I'm very passionate about the city and passionate about the people. Currently, I do volunteer at the National Air Guard Historical Foundation, so that's my active volunteering. From interest perspective, I'm coming from a background from architectural and engineering home in a family. Myself, I've been 12 years in commercial real estate, and I'm specializing in facility management. I've been managing buildings throughout here in Minneapolis, supporting a large portfolio. As well, I do have a FMA facility management designation from BOMI, and LEED accreditation, and a Six Sigma certification. At current, I am a senior analyst for business intelligence for Jones Lang LaSalle, and supporting a very large portfolio, over some million square feet. So there's a really strong, I've been with buildings and construction and everything around planning for quite a bit long time. So seeing the position as on this board, I see 2 of the best worlds coming together, and I can help both sides with the interests and the love for the city and my knowledge as well at the same time.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for being here today. Would anyone else like to speak in the public hearing? Anyone else like to speak? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. I had the opportunity to be part of the interview process for the candidates, and we actually had a significant amount of interest this year in the Zoning Board of Adjustment. I think we interviewed 8 candidates, maybe. It took a long time. And, I would just comment that Ms. Drescher and the other reappointees all, I thought, were really compelling in their description of the ZBA's legal responsibility to the city. As we know firsthand, when you're dealing with quasi-judicial issues, the role of the committee is really often to enforce our code. And so Ms. Drescher and the others really articulated that well in a way that made me very comfortable. I think we see very few appeals from the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and Mr. Perry has long been the chair of that committee. I think it speaks to the way that people I think it reflects that people feel heard and that they're being treated fairly. So we're really appreciative of all the volunteer hours that go into all of our Zoning Board of Adjustment committee members. And with that, I would move the appointments of the 3 ZBA members. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Goodman.
Chair Bender, I think it's really good that you pointed out that we see very few appeals anymore. And what it says is that the staff is doing their work, the process is playing out correctly, and we're not seeing anywhere near as many appeals. In all my years on this board, I think this is the year with the fewest number of appeals, both from the Planning Commission and from the Zoning Board of Adjustment, which also says that the chair is actively participating in the Planning Commission process in a way that has put very few issues in front of us, and it is greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? And that motion carries. Thanks again. Now we'll move to the consent agenda. We have items 2 through 5 on the consent agenda. Item number 2 is a street vacation for 4th Street and 5th Street South related to the construction of the new stadium downtown. Item number 3 is at 1901 Fillmore Street, approving an application submitted by Laura Bonicelli for rezoning from R2B to C1 to allow for a restaurant there. Item number 4 is Karma Coffee Shop and Offices at 514 Lowry Avenue Northeast, approving an application to rezone from R2B to C1 to allow for the opening of a coffee shop and an office space in the existing building. And item number 5 is residential infill, referring to staff, the zoning ordinance amending Title 20 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances, Chapter 546 and 547. This is brought forward by Councilmember Palmisano, and it is a slight change to the previously adopted 1 to 4 residential infill, just responding to something we're seeing actually a lot of variance requests for. So is there any discussion on items 2 through 4 or 2 through 5 or questions? I'll move those items. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay, and those items carry. Moving to our discussion items, item number 6 is the Downtown East Commons Urban Park Project. This is the first time we have seen this issue here, which is related to an environmental assessment worksheet. So we will start with a presentation from staff. And we also, if committee members, we do have 3 folks here who've probably seen these in the past, but we also have Mr. Nielsen here to answer any legal questions that folks may have.
So what's on your overhead, I'll just orient you to the development site. This is the planned unit development that Ryan Companies brought forward to the city in 2013. And what's highlighted in green are the 2 blocks that are slated for the park, which is the project referenced in the document and throughout my presentation today. So just to orient you, this is Park Avenue and then Portland Avenue. The new stadium is over in this direction, which would be east. So good morning. We are here as a petition was filed with the Minnesota Environmental Quality Board, also known as the EQB, requesting the preparation of an environmental assessment worksheet for the Downtown East Commons Urban Park Project proposed on the sites at 415 5th Street South and 500 5th Street South. On January 22nd, the EQB subsequently assigned the city of Minneapolis as the responsible government unit, or the RGU, after determining that the petition was complete and valid. According to the petitioner, the petition is based on 2 facts. One, that the park will be adjacent to the MSFA stadium that contains highly transparent and highly reflective glass that is known to result in bird window collisions. And 2, that the proposed park property will be acquired land that is part of an industrial development district intended to address blight caused by marginal property, and thus must be investigated for the presence of hazardous materials. Through the review, and as you can see in our findings of fact document, it's undisputed that the project does not meet any of the mandatory categories for an EAW to be prepared. Therefore, it is implied that the petitioner is requesting or urging the city to prepare a discretionary EAW. The Minnesota rules indicate that a discretionary EAW shall be prepared in response to a citizen petition only when 2 things occur. The proposed project is not exempt under the Minnesota rules, and when the RGU determines that the proposed project may have the potential for significant environmental effects. The rules state that projects for which environmental review has already been completed are exempt from any additional review, including a citizen petition for an EAW. In addition, this rule also exempts projects for which all governmental decisions have been made. So to describe the project, it is a park on 1 2/3 blocks located in downtown Minneapolis. The site is currently occupied by the Star Tribune headquarters building, which will be demolished, and then a surface parking lot. In December of 13, the city approved development plans for what was called the Downtown East Planned Unit Development, or the PUD project, which included the park. As part of the approvals, the developer was required to deliver a basic park, including seed and/or sod, sidewalks around the perimeter of it, and streetlights around the 2 blocks. Subsequently, in 2014, in February, the city approved a development agreement between the City of Minneapolis, Ryan Companies, and the MSFA, which further defined the design enhancements for the basic park. And those enhancements included standards comparable to what we see in Gold Medal Park, except for the mound in the middle of it. The design is to provide for flexible programming of the space and an open core with permanent structures located towards the perimeter of the site. At this time, the city has no further plans for the park other than what was approved as part of the PUD have been submitted for a review by the city. And since the PUD has already been approved, which includes this park, no further review is required. Prior to the land use application process commencing for the PUD, the city, as the RGU, ordered and the EQB approved an alternative urban area-wide review, or an AUAR, for the development. That was the environmental review process that was done for the 5 blocks that are included in this PUD. And again, the boundaries of the AUAR included the park. And it's an alternative method for environmental review that substitutes for any EAW or environmental impact statement and EIS required for individual projects within the AUAR boundary. I apologize for all the acronyms. Trying to shorten my presentation. On November 1st of 13, the AUAR was adopted by the city, including the plan for mitigation. And the mitigation plan identifies the regulatory requirements and/or mitigation measures needed in order to reduce the level of potential impact of that development. And all of the mitigation plan was included in your packets. Because the park was included in the AUR, it is exempt from now completing an EAW as urged by the petitioner. So going into the 2 arguments from the petition, specifically related to bird window collision, the petitioner indicates that the park will be adjacent to the MSFA stadium that contains the highly transparent and highly reflective glass that is known to result in bird window collisions. The Department of Natural Resources, along with other agencies, received and had an opportunity to comment on the AUAR for the planned unit development. The DNR did comment on the AUAR by saying that they had no comments at that time. No other agency provided comments pertaining to migratory bird flyways. So no environmental impacts pertaining to birds were identified through the AUAR process for the PUD. So there are no specific mitigation steps related. The environmental effects associated with the construction of the stadium were addressed through the EIS process that was completed by the MSFA as the RGU for that project in July of 2013. As part of that environmental review, the MSFA met with representatives of the Audubon Society to discuss potential mitigation measures to minimize bird impacts. In response to those conversations, the MSFA agreed to implement operational measures to minimize interferences with migrating birds, such as turning off stadium lights during overnight hours in the spring and the fall. The city of Minneapolis approved the design for the stadium in August of 13. Because environmental review for the stadium was completed and governmental decisions permitting the structure have been made, the stadium is also exempt from the citizen petition for the EAW. There is nothing that can be done via this petition by the city to require the developer of the stadium to implement any mitigation measures related to birds. As for hazardous materials, the petitioner notes that the park project property must be investigated for hazardous materials. As part of the AUAR Phase 1 environmental assessment, environmental site assessment was conducted. There was petroleum sites identified and leaks from those underground storage tanks identified on these specific blocks. As part of the development review process, the applicant, Ryan Companies, will be working with the the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for mitigating those petroleum leaks and containing the contamination. So based on the information in the above analysis, the city of Minneapolis concludes the following, and there are 7 findings of fact that we are asking you to make. One, that the findings document and related documentation were prepared in compliance with the procedures of the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act and Minnesota rules. Two, the project at issue does not meet any of the mandatory EW thresholds contained in the Minnesota rules. Three, the project is exempt from preparation of an EAW pursuant to the rules. The Minneapolis City Council adopted an AUAR for the PUD on November 1st of 2013, including the plan for mitigation. The Minnesota Multi-Purpose Stadium project is also exempt from the petition pursuant to the Minnesota rules. Environmental review was completed, governmental review was completed, and construction has already been completed. Substantial construction has already been completed for that project. Any alleged effects pertaining to hazardous materials are localized and will be addressed through the existing regulatory process. The city makes the finding that the petition for the EUW for the Downtown East Commons Urban Park project on the properties located at 415 5th Street South and 500 5th Street South is denied, and the city of Minneapolis shall adopt the above findings of fact and record of decision document.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also wanted to see if our attorney would comment on this. I know you mentioned basically how this stands in comparison to some of our other environmental work.
Chair Bender, Councilmember Johnson, and Hillary, I think, stated everything very well. But to reiterate some of her points, the purpose of the state environmental review program is information gathering. There's often a misconception that somehow the environmental review program has approval authority over a project, and that's not true. The utility of the program is that it discloses information about potential environmental effects, arrives at some suggested or potential mitigation measures, and then governmental authorities that have decisions that have yet to be made on a project can then take that information and incorporate it into their decisions through conditions of approval. So in that regard, the exemptions that Hillary has noted reflect that primary purpose. You know, projects that have already undergone environmental review in some fashion are exempt. Projects in which all governmental decisions, permitting decisions have been made are exempt because there's no more further opportunity to incorporate that information or mitigation measures. And then projects for which substantial construction has begun also are exempt. So the staff recommendation reflects those exemptions as well, which is in furtherance of the clear purpose of the review program.
Okay, are there any other questions for staff or any motions?
Madam Chair.
Council President Johnson.
Of an environmental assessment worksheet and adopting the findings of fact and record of decision.
Okay, is there any further discussion? I may ask, since this really is dealing with the bird safe glass issue, if Mr. Wittenberg, I know you've been doing some work related to this issue. I don't want to take a lot of time here since the legal, I think, issues are clear that this isn't really the right leverage point for that, but maybe you could just comment briefly on some of the work that you're doing on that issue.
Thank you, Chair Bender. And yes, very briefly, I have reached out to Audubon, Minnesota, because we do think there is a legitimate issue for us to be conscious of with future construction in the city. So our intent is to engage in some kind of staff training or planning commission training to result in some sort of guidelines or council resolution or some action around this issue that shows that we are very serious about looking at this in future construction in the city.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to the seventh item on our agenda under discussion. This is another environmental assessment worksheet related to the L&H Station project on East Lake Street.
Good morning, Chair Bender and committee members. What's before you this morning is an actual EAW document, so it's different than what you just heard. And what's before you now is that there's an actual completed EAW document that was required based on the fact that this project on the subject site, which I'll describe shortly, meets certain threshold requirements under the Minnesota state rules. This morning, what is before you is a determination of the need for an environmental impact statement. This is sort of the secondary aspect that happens after an EAW is completed. And so we're basically asking you to determine whether the EAW that is prepared for this particular development is adequate. This is for the LNH station located at 2225 East Lake Street. It's hard to get that address out of my mouth, but this is the subject site, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it, given that there's been a lot of discussion about this site over the course of many years. This is currently the MPS building located here, and the rest, of course, is surrounded predominantly by a surface parking lot. So I'll just keep this up for reference as I roll through a couple of things here. Again, the Zoning and Planning Committee, what our recommendation is this morning for you is that you would determine that this EAW is adequate and that no EIS is necessary. And that's based on 4 factors. One being that the EAW was prepared as well as the accompanying documents in compliance with the procedures of the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act, as well as the Minnesota rules. That 2, we've addressed all of the issues for which existing information could be reasonably obtained. 3, that we've evaluated the 4 criteria as mandated by the state rules adequately, which we talk about in terms of type, extent, and reversibility of environmental effects, cumulative potential effects, the extent to which the environmental effects are subject to mitigation by ongoing public regulatory authority, and then lastly, the extent to which the environmental effects can be anticipated and controlled as a result of either other environmental studies that are undertaken by public agencies or the project proposer, And then lastly, the finding that the EAW, of course, is no endorsement of the project. It doesn't allow for the establishment or the construction of the project. It basically allows the applicant to move forward with the city's official review process. As I mentioned at the beginning, the reason why this environmental review was completed, or this EAW was completed, was due to the fact that this project meets certain thresholds. When you look at this project in totality, it exceeds the 375 residential requirement that's outlined in the Minnesota state rules, as well as the mixed residential component, which for industrial and commercial projects, that's 400,000 square feet. And again, for residential projects, that's 375. So when the quotient exceeds 1, you're required to do it. The project, and I'm going to put up a site plan here that sort of shows the overall proposed plan, is anticipated to be developed over the course of 10 years. It is anticipated to be developed within 4 separate stages. This is a 6.5-acre site. At the conclusion of this anticipated development, there would be 565 residential units, 100,000 commercial square feet in an office setting, 16,000 square feet of retail commercial space, and then in total 840 potential parking spaces. Each particular phase of this project would be brought through the city's design and approval process separately. Most recently, there have been discussions, of course, about the first phase of the development. We've been through one committee of the whole meeting, and we'll be at another one next week to discuss this first phase of development. But of course, until they can submit formal land use applications to the city, the determination on the adequacy of the EAW will need to be conducted. So basically what happens is when the document is filed to the city, we review that document, we complete it, and it gets referred out to the required agencies. And so that was done in December. It went out for 30-day comment, and we did receive some comments, only 5. One from MnDOT, there was another from Met Council. The neighborhoods had some general comments on the TDMP. The DNR had comments, and then also the State Historical Preservation Office. Of these letters that were received, and all of those are in your packets, of course, there was nothing that was substantive. The one issue that we did identify in the EAW as being something that we needed to continue to work on and continue to address was the issue of traffic and parking in the neighborhood. I think all of you are well familiar with the site again. And again, this is the existing condition, but aware that this particular area located closest to Hiawatha, and again, just for reference, this is Lake Street, Hiawatha, and 22nd. This particular area has been used as a park and ride since the establishment of the Hiawatha line. And this will be terminated in March. And so there are some issues just with park and ride users realizing that that lot is no longer available, as it will be used to supplement that MPS building, which will remain as part of the first phase of development. And then the first phase of development, again, located toward the intersection of 22nd and Lake, is basically what will happen as part of that first phase. But again, the issue of traffic and parking was brought up because of the fact that there are what we call hide and ride users in the neighborhood. You have spillover parking from people who are using that station. They've become accustomed to using that as a park and ride. You also have other major institutions in the area, like the high school and also the YWCA that's located across the street. So there's other issues. And so we really made a very strong effort at the outset of this, before the EAW was even filed, when we were sort of scoping for this document, to make sure that we had a very comprehensive TDMP that had been provided for this particular project. The draft document is within your EAW packets. It has gone through one set of revisions with the city, and much of that had to do with negotiating the on-site parking that was being provided for this specific development, understanding the users with Hennepin County, basically establishing their hub in the office space as part of phase one, just understanding how those users would work in conjunction with the residential building that is also proposed. As part of the first phase, this would be where Hennepin County is proposing to locate their hub at the corner of Lake Street and 22nd Avenue. This particular building located here is proposed to be a 6-story, 125-unit residential building. And then at the interior of the site, there's 2 levels of below-grade parking, 1 level of at-grade parking that is being proposed at a total of 406 spaces. Where it's shown as housing here, that is obviously the location currently of where the existing MPS building is. That will remain for 3 to 5 years. And so that is one of the reasons why the first phase sort of terminates at that existing building. Again, MPS will continue to operate out of that site, and the rest of the site that's currently surface parking will be utilized to serve the MPS building, as well as spillover parking in the short term for Hennepin County. So through that process, at least with the TDMP, we have negotiated reducing the amount of on-site parking as we begin to understand a little bit more about Hennepin County and how they use that building. And a lot of that concern was due to the fact that not only was that surface parking, at least the numbers at first when we had looked at them seemed a bit high, being immediately adjacent to a transit station area and immediately adjacent to a platform, but we we were also concerned about the impacts of that ground level parking and how that impacted the design of the building along 22nd. They have been modifying that. They have improved the appearance of that elevation along that building while reducing parking. When we first saw this particular proposal, there were about 450 spaces. They've reduced it almost 50 spaces at this point. And so it's an ongoing negotiation with us that when they do file land use applications for this site, we'll continue to finalize that TDMP document. But we do want you to be aware that of all the potential environmental issues, this is the one that really we paid most attention to and are most focused on. And it's been a collective collaborative effort between CPED, Hennepin County, the developers, as well as our Public Works Department. And they could certainly speak to that a bit more. I think with that, the only other 2 comments that as I noted earlier in the presentation, there were 5 comments that had come in during that 30-day comment period. And again, none of them are particularly substantive. But the MnDOT conversation, there was one comment that MnDOT had, and it was basically regarding trip generation and the functionality of the intersections in the area as a result of this development happening. And right now, the consultants with the developer are in communication with MnDOT, and that issue is in the process of being resolved. So I just wanted to make that note for the record. And then there was one other comment too from the DNR, and this was a similar comment to what we've been seeing recently about concern about migratory birds and being concerned that the structure is between the lakes and the river, and it's an important flyway for birds, and just making sure that this building wasn't entirely glass. And what my response is in the draft findings of fact is essentially that the architects in Hennepin County were aware of this when they designed the building, and they have implemented a lot of the design standards that the Audubon Society encourages to prevent bird building collisions. Basically that the building isn't designed as a glass block. There are separations with punched windows with 5 to 7 feet spacing, et cetera. So I can go into more detail if you'd like, but we do feel that they have adequately addressed that for the record. So moving again ahead, Our recommendation on this is that you determine that the EW is adequate and that there is no need for the EIS per the original recommendations I noted at the start of the presentation.
Okay, are there any questions? Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to move item number 7, approving staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this item? Councilmember Reich?
Presently, we've gone over the different tools in terms of trying to get the density we want with the tools that we have. Are we contemplating minimums for station areas? Because we only get so many stations, as we found out, even with proposed lines. And so, is that even being discussed? I mean, maybe that's a question for the chair or any staff people, but it's a great theory to say we're going to build the population of the city, but where's it going to go? And if it's not going to go in places like this, where? And so I applaud this because we're talking about 500 units versus the 50 we fought over maybe 4 years ago at other station sites. So it's definitely progress, but I just wanted to throw that little editorial commentary out there. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Reich. Councilmember Goodman.
I don't disagree with Councilmember Reich. I just wanted to thank the county for stepping in and making something happen here. I mean, that's really the story behind this development. I think most people understand it, and I just thought I better say it out loud. If the county didn't step in and try to negotiate with other government entities, the neighborhood association, the city, et cetera, nothing would be happening here. There wouldn't be a one person living here, and we'd continue to have that, put up that picture of all the surface parking here. I mean, this is a massive environmental improvement, and no one more than the county really wants to build along these transit lines because they're the ones who have instigated these transit lines in the first place. So, and they have a pretty big showing here today, which says it's important to them to have the city say, yes, you've done a good job and we're really happy about it. And I think everyone on this panel would tell you that 10 years, if you could do it in 6, that'd be better, but it's the market selling these parcels one at a time and having the market develop them because the county has not intervened as being a developer, which is also good. So I just want to thank the county and Commissioner McLaughlin and the team of staff that have put this together. This has been a vexing intersection ever since I've been here, and it looks like you've come up with a real win-win.
Thank you. I will just add, again, my thanks as well to the county who has, I don't know how many community meetings there have been about this project, probably dozens, 20 community meetings, and the responsiveness to the neighborhood leaders who've been working on this for a very long time. Thanks should go to them as well. We'll have a lot more time to do all the thank yous and things as the land use approvals come through. But yeah, at this point, just the effort that has gone into this project is really astonishing. To Councilmember Reich's point, I think this, I don't know how many more of these really amazing TOD sites we have left in the city, but this has also raised some questions in my mind about how we regulate parking near these very high intensity transit stations. Again, there's sort of this push and pull where what densities can the market support? Where are the trips? What are the mode shares today? But when you're looking at 4,000 new trips in an intersection, that's really significant. And the extent to which we can work with the county to continue to encourage those trips to be by transit, biking, and walking, I think that's good for the neighborhood as well. So I really appreciate all the time that staff has put into this as well in the TDM plan. Echo all the comments that have been made. So is there any further discussion on Councilmember Johnson's motion? Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. And that motion carries. Thank you so much for everyone who came today. That concludes our agenda, and therefore we are adjourned.